Greetings. What I'd like to do is briefly look at the Syrian crisis right now, and to put it into context, the date of this video is very important. So, whatever happens tomorrow, I obviously can't predict, and next week and a month later, but today it is September the 7th, 2013. And the first thing, as far as our genocide course is concerned, I would like you to really think about the Syrian situation and the Darfur situation. Some would say you can't even compare these, and others would say you can compare them and find a lot of similarities. I would ask you to maybe look at the international and national responses, the international response to Darfur and what that has been historically, and the international response to Syria and what that has been historically. This is not a new thing. Darfur has been going on for years and years and years and years. The genocide in Darfur and the crisis in Syria and civil war has been going on for at least several years. So the media acts as if it's just a new thing. Probably the changing factor was the report that the Syrian leaders used sarin gas on the rebels. And of course, there's always that big debate. How do you decide when enough is enough? I mean, that's a political question, I think. But I would look back on this and look at the international and the responses we've had in the United States, or lack thereof, and how this continues in a process. But I would also go back to the theories. And first, I would, in trying to understand all this, I don't think it has much to do with religion, even politics. It appears to be political. Everything's always political. If it wasn't political, we wouldn't have, 90% of the news. But what I would hypothesize here is that the standard variable that seems to be operating in all of these cases of genocide, and all of these cases of civil wars, and all of these cases of massacres, and all of these cases of slavery and the sex trade, is a group that wants to use domination as a technique to control others. Simply put, I'm borrowing Lonnie Athens, the symbolic interactionist sociologist's work, where he focuses on domination as a critical factor in understanding social interaction and behavior. What would be the major motivating factors? And we often find that there are multiple ones, even though we often will classify our genocides maybe as ideological, economic, fear-based, xenophobic, whatever the case might be. I think you'll often find a mix, but we try to find a primary motivating factor. I think really, if we step back, one of the motivating factors is the need or the desire to dominate others. And even when you have leaders, the followers, in a sense, become those that dominate others because they're part of the dominating group. And I think it's important to map out this process to see how it can become dangerous. And one way I suggest to do this is to use Lonnie Athens' work on violentization theory, the process of becoming violent, dangerous individuals, or the process of becoming violent, dangerous groups. So the desire to dominate and the actions of domination can be separated here. Someone may want to dominate others and not have that ability. And so I think that's relevant to look at, especially when we begin to wonder, should, for example, the United States do anything? And there's a lot of debate going on now. But a couple questions, and that is, number one, what purpose would whatever we do serve? What is our goal? But what are the likely outcomes? I'm assuming that a lot of political people working high up there and military people have done scenario planning and scenario analysis to look at the various scenarios, with a very good outcome that's desired to the worst case scenario, and several in between. and then to try to think, okay, well, what happened next, and what would happen after that, and try to put some kind of theoretical view to understand what is going on. From what I've heard in the media, what I've read, what I've listened to on the news, I have about as much information as I started with, basically nothing. And the analysis is so superficial that I think a lot of times we're misled. I know, of course, some of you who work in law enforcement know the media usually portrays your cases when they make the press extremely accurately. Same thing here. And a lot of times we may not even know what's going on. For example, when we say, well, if we need to aid the rebels, who are the rebels? How many rebel groups are there? Are there one, two, seven? And what kinds of situations are these, or types of situations are these groups involved in? Is it possible that some of these rebel groups are even antagonistic and trying to dominate each other? I don't know. What are the primary motivating factors? And I think we see this in a lot of conflicts. And finally, what I would also recommend in tracing the patterns, you can see in my previous videos on violentization theory, I've gone over how the process occurs from brutalization all the way to extreme virulency in a variety of cases, all the way from bullying all the way to genocide. But also I've talked about and written about using David Olson's circumplex model, which is often used in family therapy and marital preparation counseling and marriage counseling. And you might say, that's kind of bizarre. Why would you apply a theory of marital therapy to civil war and genocides and the like? And I would say because his main concepts, I think, go along and help us along with Lonnie Athens' theory of domination. And that is, David Olson looks at cohesion, the emotional bonding or closeness. The idea here is too much cohesion has negative effects just as too little does. And also flexibility. That here we look at leadership and the types of discipline and the roles and negotiation people have. And flexibility can be basically too rigid, which is a problem, all the way to too chaotic, which is a problem. And so you get these patterns. 4 patterns can emerge. For example, you could have chaotically enmeshed, rigidly disengaged, or chaotically disengaged as extremely problematic areas. And so we have to look at how behavior, actions, thought processes move toward one extreme or the other. And there may be an attempt to balance, and sometimes there's an overcorrection. So I think Professor Olson's circumplex model of marriage and family therapy also provides us a wealth of information in trying to understand how these whole situations progress. And the changes. And so I think it's important to kind of summarize to A, look at the primary motivating factors, B, to understand the players involved, their motivations, and their power structures, and how they're socially structured, basically. And then finally, to look at where all these groups are moving in a networked scheme of interactions. And so what I've tried to do here briefly in under 10 minutes is to bring in a little bit of theoretical perspective to understand the Syrian crisis internally, internationally, and look at the parallels briefly. And of course, the students in my genocide class will have a lot more information about the Darfur genocide as we're wrapping up Hagen and Ryman Richman's excellent book on the crisis in Darfur. And then you can see if there's some parallels there. Obviously, there's a lot of differences, but I think there's some core similarities. And again, Lonnie Athens' primary work looking at violentization theory and domination gives us a wealth of information to theoretically map what's going on, with the ultimate idea here that maybe we can stop things from progressing and maybe we can prevent further deaths and injuries. Thank you.